I mean, well, there were four services basically that we dealt with. I mean, primarily the police. I mean, they were our frontmen, if you like. They received the call through a 999 system, as it turned out then, and they had a contact list. Primarily, in the early days, it was people like Reg, the chief controller. Eventually, it became through whoever was the duty controller, which is a bit like it is now. And surprise, surprise, in those days, if we had an incident, and cave rescues seems to go on a bit longer than they do now, occasionally we have long ones, but lots of cave rescues, we were having lots of serious rescues. Cave rescues, maybe 10 a year, which were quite serious, which is a lot when you consider. And of course they'd turn out not just the local bobby, but you'd get an inspector or a chief inspector. Yeah, these days, I mean, it's very much just, if you're lucky, a local policeman. They leave it very much to the lads to get on with. In the early days, of course, it was much more, how can I say, publicity worth. And of course, they used to go on considerably longer. We had a canteen at that stage, which used to be parked outside the entrance to the cave. So you could see then we had meals and hot drinks laid on from right at the entrance. These days, I can't remember the last time we had anything like that. We do have food taken to the entrance and so on and underground. But in those days, it was very much sort of, you know, the cave rescue went a long time. And that relationship with the police was terrific. You know, we wanted for nothing. And in fact, we still do want for nothing. I mean, it's very good. And obviously, they appreciate what we do, I'm sure. And next to that, of course, is our wonderful friends in the ambulance service. And over the years, you know, that's differed. We've had people who've been heavily involved. I can remember one chap who was station officer at Settle, Alvin Fawcett, and he was heavily involved. Anything that we wanted, he could manage to magic up from somewhere. And of course, the fire service, well, in those days, they were called the fire brigade. Now it's called the fire and rescue service. And of course, it's like a lot of things, it's changed with time. In those days, we used to have them out occasionally to help pump water away from caves, going into the entrance so that it was lessened, so we could get in and get out easily. Or in fact, if it had been flooded, we had the entrance pumped so we could get in and find whatever we had to find. And of course, along came, in my early days, there was RAF and a helicopter. I mean, there were what we call the Whirlwind helicopter was the first one that I ever came across. And then there was a Wessex, and then just latterly the Sea King, and then we've moved on now, and we have the Coast Guard look after us. Of course, the sad thing is about all this, that helicopters can't go underground. You know, they're on the surface. It's a great pity we can't squeeze a helicopter underground. So we use helicopters on a regular basis for whatever reason. I mean, I can certainly remember it was a lot easier than it is now, and I could ring them up on a Friday evening or a Saturday morning and say, what are you doing this weekend? Why? Well, we've got some pipes that we want moving, and you know, things like we had some concrete pipes that wanted moving to the entrance to Iberfell Cavern, and they came along with a helicopter and uplifted them from the road for us. So things like that, the relationship with the RAF was completely different. Now it's obviously because it's on a big contract, a government contract with the Coast Guard, it's a different kettle of fish altogether. But much easier, like a lot of things, become more and more difficult, more and more complicated. Well, it's a passage of time. I suppose a really good example of how it's changed is in our early days, the fire brigade, as they were called then, used to have a policy for Tom, Dick and Harry of, you know, get out and stay out. Then it became the fire and rescue service, and it was, well, you know, stop where you are, we'll come and get you. Well, obviously, because of recent circumstances like Grenfell Tower, you know, you have to ask yourself, you know, is that the right policy? And so this similar process applies to other things. I mean, the police at one time, nothing was too much trouble. And it still isn't, don't get me wrong. I mean, certainly the police in North Yorkshire are very, very thankful for our help. And on a regular basis, on an annual basis, they have a presentation to 2 or 3 members from each team, and have done that for the last, certainly from my knowledge, for the last 10 years or so. The relationship with the press, of course, has changed over the years. I mean, and particularly because cave rescues were really newsworthy. And of course, they used to go on for some time. And of course, anything that lasts for any time, the press managed to find some way of getting there to be on the scene, whether it's just a newspaper reporter or in fact eventually the TV and the likes. I mean, used to roll up on a regular basis because cave rescues gave them that opportunity. And they were static. Cave rescues generally are static events. A cave's fixed, a cave's entrance is fixed, it's not going to move. Whereas a mountain rescue, if you like, is on the move all of the time. So for them to get themselves fixed, the only place they can fix themselves at is at the base, unless they manage somehow to hire a helicopter and the likes. Usually that's how it, and so the relationship has changed. It's I mean, it's not to say it's any different in terms of reporting. They don't occupy these days quite as much space unless it's unusual, some unusual incident that people might not have heard of. Well, I mean, it primarily started, I guess, a lot of the numbers game in terms of cavers was because of the universities. The universities in particular were very keen on outdoor activities for freshers and the likes, and so it was a question of how many freshers you could sign up to carry out these activities, and one of the activities was, of course, caving. Of course, caving in itself needs some experience. These young people, albeit that they were keen and enthusiastic and probably reasonably fit, were introduced to an environment very quickly that they were not capable of handling. So we used to have a sort of a saying in CRO, the silly season. And the silly season started not long after an influx of freshers in September. So September, October and November were often quite busy for CRO from CRO's point of view, because some of these poor kids got themselves into trouble and we had to pick up the pieces. Right, surface rescues. I mean, in the past, slowly but surely over the years, they've become more predominant. I mean, in the early days when cave rescue started, per se, and the fact that the cave rescue organisation carries out surface and underground incidents and lots of other things, which normally a mountain rescue team would do. In the early days, it was maybe 2 or 3 or 4 a year, and now it's become predominant. Whereas cave rescues have dropped off from maybe at some stage 20, 10, 15, 20 a year, they've now dropped off to 2 or 3, half a dozen a year, if that. Whereas mountain rescues, if you can use the word, round here it's generally a fell rescue, have got in the 80s and 90s, massive, and because of clothings are much better, people are encouraged to come out and walk. I mean, things like the Yorkshire Dales, and in particular the waterfalls at Ingleton. If you're going to put, 10,000 people around an obstacle course like the waterfalls, you're almost bound to have somebody slip or fall. So at one stage, I mean, it was more dangerous to walk around the Ingleton waterfalls than it was to go caving. And in fact, I got accosted because in my annual report, I'd mentioned this fact, and it was a fact that there were more people, sadly, killed walking around the waterfalls than there were caving. And when we had a look at it, and the authorities came along, the police, the district council authority people came, and health and safety people came and had a look, and we pointed it out to them where it's gone. Obviously, they then got onto the waterfalls authorities and said, look, you need to put fences up here, you need to warn people about this, you need to fix the footpaths and so on and so forth. The British Cave Rescue Council is really the governing body, if that's the right word, for all the cave rescue teams in England. There are a few, some predominantly in the big caving areas, in particular the Yorkshire Dales and Derbyshire and Somerset. And each of those areas has a cave rescue. So I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think there's probably about 12 or 15 cave rescue teams in the British Isles. And they have an annual meeting, as you do. They're predominantly advice teams. They act on our behalf. In fact, they've had a relationship for the last few years with the Mountain Rescue Committee. Oh, sorry, the Mountain Rescue England and Wales. It used to be, in the early days, when Reg attended, it used to be called the Mountain Rescue Committee. No longer now. It's made up of all the mountain rescue teams in England and Wales. And so they're part of that, and they contribute to that. I mean, it does have some great advantages. For example, it was very advantageous when the incident occurred out in Thailand with those school kids that were trapped in a cave. I mean, the Cave Rescue Council, if you like, organised the divers and various aspects of it up from this country and called them out and organised them to go over there. And in fact, the British cave divers were predominantly involved in that rescue. In fact, 2 of our divers finished up finding the kids in the first instance.